Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Laura Froyam, and I'm an account executive here at CDI. And today we're going to be going through looking for love and connection, looking no further than the API, the Laserfiche API and SDK. I'm going to start off with a couple of housekeeping items. Everybody is going to be muted throughout the duration of this webinar, but if you have questions at any time throughout, feel free to type them into the questions box and I will certainly address them after the webinar is over. And then anything that I might not be able to address, I will definitely get back to you after the webinar in the next day or two and get you responses to your questions. And then slides and screenshots will be available upon request, along with a listing of the resource URLs that I'm going to be providing today. And then the webinar session is going to be recorded and it should be available to you within the next couple days as well. So today's agenda is all about the Laserfiche API, the SDK, the resources, and then of course any questions that the team has. Being an account executive at CDI, my knowledge of development is maybe more limited. And so I just wanted to start with a poll for the team to kind of see what everybody's job role is with Laserfiche and how you interact with Laserfiche. And this is just simply because today's webinar is really just going to be kind of topical. What's included in the SDK, what's included in the API, resources that are available to you. It's not going to be any configuration work. But if you are looking for something a little bit more technical in nature, I want to encourage you to check out this Laserfiche tutorial that we had done a few months back on the API, where Michael Mathis, our VP of CDI Solutions, went through kind of a similar overview of what I'm doing today, but actually goes in and does some configuration with the API. So you can definitely take a look at that, again, maybe halfway through his webinar and check it out. Right, so I think everybody has responded. All right, looks like we have a good amount of, here, let me just share this. Administrators and developers within here. And so hopefully, again, you get some just good information on the API and what's available. All right, so continuing on. So the Laserfiche API, what is an API? For those of you who might not know, the API is a tool that developers use to build integrations between Laserfiche and other applications. So it's essentially a bunch of pre-built RESTful HTTP requests that can be used to get and store things to Laserfiche. Yay. What does RESTful mean? Again, because I'm not super technical in nature, these are some things that I had to look up because I was interested in. So REST is essentially an underlying architectural principle of the web. And so the way that a RESTful API works is that, and why it's so great is because the developers that are configuring with the API don't necessarily need to know all of the configuration details of the application that you are integrating with. Everything is done all over HTTP requests. And so it's essentially Laserfiche is sending a request out to the other application is receiving it, and then the magic is happening. So that's kind of what a RESTful API is. Laserfiche has moved and has had, I guess, the SDK kit for a long time, but has since moved to the API because it's more of an industry standard, which is why we're hearing about it now. It makes configuring integrations a lot easier because you don't have to install most often, and you can do everything, through the web. The Laserfiche API is built on a Swagger platform. So that's an online interactive API documentation provider so that when you are using the API, you can test things out right there and get your, JSON files right there. Additionally, there are lots of libraries and sample projects that are available to users on the GitHub site as well. So definitely check that out as we go along here. So now we're going to talk about just some of the features included, and then we're going to walk through the Laserfiche website. So these are just some of the basics: authenticating to the Laserfiche system, creating folders, importing documents, writing field values, so we can interface with metadata information, and then we can do a lot of searching. So let's check out the website and walk through it quick. So the website is just developer.laserfiche.com, and everything that you might need to know about the API is available to you here. So if you want to jump into getting started, you can certainly click through, learn more. You can authenticate to the Swagger Playground, where again, you can, follow the step-by-step guides to get set up, and then test any of your document pulls or metadata pulls to get those JSON files for you. Additionally, as you click through the website and you get into the Swagger platform, you can kind of see again more information. So we can get attribute information, we can get audit information, we can, with document entries, we can delete things, we can patch or update. So again, it makes it really easy for you to identify what you want and what you can and cannot do with the API as you peruse through. All right. So a couple of things I want to highlight. I connected with developers on my side to get as much information to be helpful for your teams. And some features are not available through the API, at least not yet. And so I wanted to call out a couple of those specifically. Document versions. So if you are building a process that entails multiple Laserfiche versions of a document, maybe contract management, and you want to use the API to call a certain version that was generated, you can't do that with the API, but you could with the SDK. You also can't do document linking. So again, if you are potentially thinking about doing a integration connection with your accounts payable software, and we want to pull in documents from that ERP into Laserfiche and have it file into the system and link up with maybe a purchase order, the API can't do that. But we can pull that document in, we can apply metadata, and then we could build a different workflow that could theoretically link those documents. So you can't do it all in one swoop. It might be, a two-step process. Administrative actions. So anything in the administrative console, if you wanted to create metadata fields or maybe update user security, the API can't do that yet. As well as records management, other write functions. Write functions would be something like when you're importing a document, you can't set up the API to delete blank pages automatically or turn pages or OCR them. But again, with the other tool set available to you in Laserfiche, you can maybe build a workflow or process it through quick fields to do some of those other write features. And then annotations. With the API, we don't have the ability to add highlights or sticky notes, as part of your import process when bringing documents into the system. But again, we could always leverage a workflow or something like that to do those actions. So let's talk a little bit about the cloud API versus the self-hosted API. So really, they are identical in nature and in what methods they extend access to. So updating, adding folders, things like that. But there are a few key differences, such as the authentication options. So within a self-hosted environment, you need to authenticate with the API using a username and password instead of OAuth, like cloud requires. The volumes can't be selected when creating new entries, or volumes can be selected when creating new entries in a self-hosted environment, but they can't in cloud. And that's because Laserfiche Cloud doesn't have volumes. You have one repository and you interface with the documents in that repository. But if you're on a self-hosted system, which again is like a Rio, Avante, subscription-based, something where you have Laserfiche installed locally within your environment or a hosted environment, you can interface with the volumes. So if police is on one volume and HR is on one volume and the rest of the city is on another volume, then you could do that within your self-hosted environment. And then deprecated APIs for cloud server sessions are not available. I had no idea what deprecated meant, so I'm just going to share that with the team too. And that just means that certain methods that Laserfiche makes may be subject to change. And so if there are any of those items listed as deprecated, those aren't available for self-hosted systems. They're only available in cloud. So let's talk about maybe a couple of use cases. So searching for documents. This would be a great resource or a great use case for the API. Accounts payable, is using their ERP. They want the ability to view the documents and metadata that are in Laserfiche through their accounting system or their ERP. You can use the Laserfiche API to create a search in Laserfiche to pull up those documents and any of the associated metadata and then display it within the other application. Something I didn't mention earlier that I do want to call out as well is that with the Laserfiche API, what is convenient about it is that it packages up those methods for connecting to Laserfiche and makes it easier for a developer to configure the connection. And so it's not just a simple plug and play, I want to get a document from Laserfiche and I get my JSON file and magically it works. You still do need interaction from a developer who can create the connection because there's not an API user interface of sorts to do that for you. But searching for documents and pulling up metadata, again, great use case for the API. Another use case would be creating documents and metadata. So human resources, you're using an HRIS or maybe an applicant tracking software. You're ready to onboard that new applicant, but you don't have an onboarding process outside of Laserfiche. So maybe that applicant tracking software pushes the documents and data associated with that applicant to your Laserfiche system, where the API can then take that information and ingest it into Laserfiche and create documents or create folder structures or once that information lands into Laserfiche, it can kick off workflow or forms processes. And so Laserfiche can grab information or receive information from the other application and bring it into the system and process it how you might need. Retrieving documents and data again. So this is another example. Maybe you're using a GIS mapping system and you want to be able to provide relevant property information either to the public or to potentially unlicensed users within Laserfiche. You could use the Laserfiche API to build out a call to the Laserfiche repository, which again does a search in the system, pulls back the relevant information, and then passes it to the GIS system to use and display for those users. So retrieving documents and data, and also bringing it into the system. So what is the SDK? The SDK is similar to the API, where it essentially provides a bunch of methods that developers can use to interface and create connections to other applications. The SDK has been around for a really long time, and it is and extends more functionality still than the API. That listing that I had provided earlier on what the API can't do, all of those things are items that the Laserfiche SDK can do. So if your team is used to using the SDK right now, our development team definitely prefers the SDK just because it has a lot more flexibility and customization options available to you. But if you're looking for some of those quick fixes and just displaying information or ingesting information, the API is really great too. So let's talk about a couple of kind of key differences between the API and the toolkit. The licensing information. So I'll have a different slide to kind of go through this in more granular detail, but the API is included with Laserfiche. The toolkit is an add-on. The Laserfiche is language agnostic, which means you don't necessarily have to code in a specific language because you're using, JSON files and HTTP requests to build out your integration. But the toolkit requires .NET, Java, or COM for development language. The capabilities, again, the API is a little bit more basic, whereas the SDK or toolkit is more granular. The documentation, the API is using the Swagger platform to display and allow you to interact with, whereas the toolkit requires proprietary local documentation. I do want to call out too that if you are using the API in a self-hosted environment, the documentation is different as well. Installations, if you're using the API in a Laserfiche cloud environment, there's no install, but there is for a self-hosted system. And then again, the toolkit requires an installation. The API doesn't allow admin console changes, whereas the toolkit does. And again, an example of that is you're going to bring or onboard. You're going to bring a new document into the system, but based on the criteria from the application that it's in now, you need to set certain security parameters on it so that only administrators will be able to see it because of XYZ. For a integration connection such as that, you would need to consider the toolkit for building out that connection because it allows you to do security changes. Authentication in the API is OAuth, whereas again, the toolkit is username and password. And then there are call limits with the API in the cloud environment, but there are no call limits with the toolkit. So let's dig into the licensing in a little bit more detail. So Laserfiche Cloud does include API calls right out of the box, so you can configure your own integrations with the API without incurring an additional cost. So for cloud, depending on what tier you're on, there are differences. So professional has 50,000 API calls and business has 100,000 API calls. And additional calls per month can be added in blocks of 50,000. I also want to differentiate what a call is. So a call is any action that you request of the API. So if you want the API to bring in a document plus metadata detail and push that into folders, that is 2 calls because it's one requesting the document and also requesting the metadata. So that would be 2 calls. And so when you are planning for your integration connections, if you're using the API in a cloud environment, that's something you just might want to be mindful of. Laserfiche does have tools available for helping you estimate how many calls you'll need, and then maybe that will help you jump into or gear towards which platform you might need to be on, or if additional calls would be needed. With self-hosted, in order to leverage the API, you just need to be on Laserfiche version 11 or higher, and then you can have access to it. And again, there are no call limits there with that self-hosted system. The SDK licensing information. So if you're interested in using the SDK, you certainly can. With Laserfiche Cloud and with self-hosted systems, it is available as an add-on. So if this is not a feature set you currently have but are interested in, certainly reach out to your CDI account manager and we can help you get set up with some pricing. So let's look ahead on the roadmap for what is available or what's coming out with the API soon. So currently we are on version 2 of the Laserfiche API. And so I know that some of the details that weren't rolled out in version 1 are now available. I want to specifically call out that during version 1 of the API, we could only import electronic documents or TIFF documents. But either way, that's been resolved, so you can bring in any type of document into the system now. You're not bogged down by a specific type. But then coming up for the self-hosted API, there's going to be calls that we can leverage in forms. So this is supposed to roll out sometime here in 2024. All of these are, but of course, anything is subject to change. And then for cloud, we've got some process automation updates. So we'll be able to interface with lookup tables. So we can receive information from another application and push that into a cloud lookup table automatically through the API, like we can with the SDK right now. We'll also be able to interface with rules, so workflow rules, and then other workflow management updates will be made. And more details, I'm sure, will roll out on that as we get closer to time. That's just kind of a quick look at what's coming. So maybe you're interested in integration, in an integration. So what are some considerations and planning you need to take into account? First thing will be kind of identifying what your use case is. You know, which department wants it? What applications are we using? Then we do a little research. Does the Laserfiche API or SDK have the actions that we need for getting or providing that information? Does the other application have an API or SDK? Does that other application have a cost associated with using that API or SDK? And then what resources for development does your team have? Something I want to call out is that here at CDI, we do have a development department. We do a lot of custom integration and development. And so, you know, if this is a project your team is interested in pursuing, you've done the research, you know it's available, but you don't have the time, you can certainly partner with the CDI development team to roll it out or to assist in configuration or to extend training. Really, whatever you need as far as an integration, our CDI development team is here to help. So some of the links that I showed and had kind of been used throughout or mentioned, the developer.laserfiche.com. So this is anything you need to know on the API. Developer API server index information, the GitHub where you can get ideas and already configured connections. And then other resources that we have available would be Laserfiche Answers. This is another good one where if you're doing your own configuration on the API, you can definitely check out Laserfiche Answers, source the Laserfiche community, and try and get answers to whatever you have. The Solution Exchange support, and then our YouTube channel, of course, also has other videos. So today, again, our webinar is short and sweet, but I do want to open it up to see if there are any questions or if anybody has a use case they want to ask about. Please let me know. Or if you are interested in getting a copy of the slides or the listing of the links, definitely feel free to reach out there in the questions, and then I can be sure to respond to you accordingly. As a reminder, the webinar today will be recorded, and once it is available, a link will go out to all registered attendees, and you'll get a copy of that you can use for distribution. And then anybody saying that they would like a copy of the slides, I will definitely send those out. Or if you want a link directly to that more technical API webinar, I'll send that out as well too. Don't know how to answer your question, I will definitely get a response and reply. Well, I want to thank everybody for your time today. Of course, hopefully this webinar was at least a little bit helpful for you for understanding where to find API documentation and some of the possibilities that are available. If you have any questions that come up throughout, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our team is here to help. And if I don't have the question, or if I don't have the answer to your question, I will get it back to you. Thanks, everyone.